Who Will Pay Them Back? By Alan D. Thompson, with Claude 3 Opus, May 2024. Agatha worked in a cubicle for 20 years to save enough money to pay her mortgage to have shelter, just like she was taught. Robots built her current house for free. Money doesn't really exist anymore. Many toiled for decades under a system that is no longer in use, a complete waste. Who will pay them back? Benjamin remembers being born in a country, a concept that feels so strange now. He spent countless hours and tens of thousands of dollars applying for visas, fighting bureaucracy, and facing constant rejection just for the chance to travel and create a better life. Borders are now non-existent, and location is a choice. But who will give him back the years he lost navigating the cruel constraints of nationalism? Charlotte spent her days scrolling through social media, watching others live the life she dreamed of, her own existence a hollow shell of unanswered messages and missed opportunities. AI-powered matchmaking has since brought soulmates together, forging unbreakable bonds that transcend the superficial barriers of the past. Who will cover the love she lost and the connections she never made, in a world where loneliness has been rendered obsolete? Daniel is kept awake at night, remembering a severe car accident he had years ago. It was one of 50 million car accidents that year, each caused by allowing humans to operate 2-ton metal vehicles manually. He was one of the lucky ones, surviving the wreckage and recovering after a few weeks in hospital. Transport is now instant, designed and run by AI. But who will make amends for the pain and trauma he endured? Emma remembers being a housewife, washing clothes, mopping floors, and cleaning. Her latest humanoid robot completes these tasks silently while she sleeps, and using equipment never seen before. The domestic drudgery that consumed generations is now an unpleasant memory. But those years of her life are gone forever. How can society repay her for the unpaid and undervalued labour that was demanded for so long? Flynn grew up in a well-known state in a first-world country, breathing toxic air, drinking contaminated water, and eating food laced with pesticides and microplastics. His body was racked with chronic illnesses from a young age, as were most of his generation, even in the so-called First World. Environmental restoration directed by AI has healed the planet, but the damage to Flynn's health can never be fully undone. Who is accountable for the suffering inflicted on him and billions of others? Grace spent over 2 hours every day commuting in traffic, an ordeal that stole precious time from her family and herself. Gridlock and pollution were facts of life. AI-optimized transportation has made travel swift, sustainable, and stress-free. But Grace's lost time can never be reclaimed. Who will compensate her for all the boredom, all the frustration, and all the special moments she missed? Henry couldn't afford the insulin he needed to manage his diabetes, so he rationed his doses and suffered the consequences. Millions died premature deaths under the healthcare systems of that era. Advanced AI now provides personalized treatments manufactured at virtually no cost. Henry survives, but the damage to his body is irreversible. Who is to blame for the needless suffering of so many? Ivy worked in a call centre, enduring abuse from angry customers for a meagre wage. She developed crippling anxiety and depression. AI has made such jobs obsolete, but mental health care was primitive and inaccessible. Ivy's emotional scars remain. How can society make amends for the psychological toll it inflicted on the most vulnerable? John worked grueling hours in a metal factory, barely earning enough to feed his family. Accidents were common, protections were few. He lost 2 fingers to an industrial saw. Automation and universal basic income have since made poverty and unsafe labour obsolete. What reparations can be made for the brutality of the past? Kate lost her big brother to suicide after years of struggling with depression and failing to find an effective treatment. AI now offers personalised neurochemical interventions with tailored compounds that can be instantly delivered to restore balance and well-being. But Kate's family will always have a hole in it. In a world where mental health is prioritised and addressed at the molecular level, who will answer for the decades of suffering? Liam lived in constant fear of his abusive girlfriend, part of the 40% of domestic violence victims who were men. Society's pervasive misandry made it difficult for him to seek help, and no shelters accepted male survivors. AI has since created sophisticated early warning systems and intervention protocols that protect all victims, regardless of gender. Who will give him back the years he spent suffering, now that his pain is nothing more than a distant echo in a world made perfect? Mia grew up in a world of disinformation where lies spread faster than truth. She watched helplessly as people became polarized, radicalized, and detached from reality. AI has since created robust systems for verification and moderation of information. But the faint scars on the social fabric and AI training datasets remain. Who will refund them for time lost, pain inflicted, and pain suffered? Noah lost his home to a bushfire, one of the countless climate refugees of his generation. He spent years in temporary shelters, never able to put down roots. AI-driven climate restoration and sustainable housing have ended such displacement. But Noah still feels unmoored. Who will restore the shelter he was stripped of, the respect he was denied? Olivia's father was imprisoned for possessing a small amount of cannabis. Shortly after his incarceration, cannabis was legalized, but the system kept him locked away for years, robbing him of his freedom and his chance to watch his daughter grow up. The AI-reformed justice system has abolished prisons and refocused on near-instant rehabilitation via brain-machine interface. But Olivia's family will always bear the scars of the cruel and unjust punishment of the past. Who will reimburse them for lost time, money, and togetherness? Peter was a doctor. With only primitive tools at his disposal, he guessed the diagnosis and treatment for nearly all of his patients during his career. He was directly responsible for harming 24,723 people and indirectly causing the death of 4,811 of them. AI would have saved each of those people. Who will pay him back for the guilt he carries? More importantly, How can society reconcile that level of harm? Quinn was one of the last children born before genetic engineering became...
Hey, we're back. The live streams are back. Was October 2024 a full-on month for you as much as it was for me? That was an intense month. Someone here called it October Business Month. And now apparently, here in Australia anyway, companies shut down from Melbourne Cup Day, which is coming up all the way through to Australia Day, which is at the end of January. But that was certainly a noisy month. Welcome back. 4th of November 2024 here in sunny Brisbane. Most of you are from elsewhere, Europe, US. This is Brisbane at the moment. We do have the option of pulling this entire live stream back by 2 hours. I reckon that might help out some of our UK, EU people in particular. Hi to Will in Arizona, CyberS. Benno's back with us with moderation. Thanks, Benno. Dax in North Carolina. Turn it off, can feel AGI. Cole's here. Kevin's in the UK. Lacey in Brussels is from Brussels, just in case you're wondering. Guys in Sussex, UK. Razvan in Romania. Cool. CyberS in Canada, was it? Yep, there we go. Austin for Turn It Off. Justin is in Canada. It's kind of difficult to balance out all the different time zones. We're serving mainly North America here, but with Europe, we could potentially pull back 2 hours. I think it's about 11 p.m. there right now. We could pull back to 9 or 10 p.m. for most of Europe, and that would be a bit more afternoon for the US. What's going on in your world? I actually want to talk about, instead of large language models and scaling, which is pretty much all we talk about, the bigger the better, the massive capabilities of models, I want to talk about watermarking. First, I want to tell you a bit of a story. I was doing, it was just keynotes, October. Keynotes. I was doing a keynote for a bunch of legends in Tel Aviv and New York City. Hi to Augury. Hundreds of them remotely via Zoom. And usually if I'm delivering a keynote remotely, I only see myself. In this case, the company had, it's just a different culture, they had all of their attendees with their cameras on, staring back at me while I'm delivering this keynote. And there was a lot of live demonstrations in it as well. We were pushing through, you might have seen something like this before. We were pushing through ChatGPT, in this case 4.0 with Canvas, just to see the edit functionality of this particular tool. You might have seen me demonstrate this before. So Apple showed something like this as well in one of their keynotes earlier. I reckon they copied me. It's taking a nasty email and asking ChatGPT to, in this case, respond to it nicely. But we could also completely, and let's do that now, we can completely transform the email into nice language. Let's say, editor, rewrite this to be diplomatic. And I'm in the middle of presenting this live to this massive team across the world. We're talking about how we can adjust the length, make it a little bit longer. Again, 300 eyes staring at me. I think Zoom lets me see about 45 eyes at a time, but there are pages and pages of eyes staring at me. I'm talking about how we can keep going with this. We could even have ChatGPT 4.0 with Canvas adjust the reading level. So if our boss is really, really smart, we could take it up to university level. We could even take it all the way down to kindergarten level. And I'm in the middle of saying this, and I hear this voice come over my in-ears. It's one of the attendees. He goes, actually, my boss is dumber than kindergarten level, so you would have to go even lower. and I'm cracking up in the middle of the keynote. If you're a full member of the memo, you can go and listen and see that recording. It was good times. Today, watermarking, let's jump in. This is something I've been asking for a while. I know I can't have it both ways. I've been asking for a while, but now I'm concerned about it. This is a look at me asking for it for the largest intergovernmental organisation in the world, or at least the most well-known. This is my AI report submission. The working paper was actually written in 2021, and then we submitted it in January 2022. One of the things I recommended to the United Nations on the back of GPT-3 and what I was seeing with large language models was, with all of this happening, we really need to know when AI is being used. So my recommendation number 3 was watermarking. Ensure that AI-generated content is clearly marked or watermarked in the early stages of AI development. I didn't say you need to get the user's consent or you need to tell the user that you're watermarking, which was probably my mistake. You can read more about that at LifeArchitect.ai/UN. Here's the memo that we pushed out a few days ago. And hey, that's us right there. And we said, as one of the very big things that has happened in the last few days, in plain English, when the model Google Gemini responds, it embeds a secret and invisible watermark in its response by the words it chooses, their order, and the general syntax of each sentence. That means every time you ask Gemini a question, the response is trackable. For example, if you use it to write a book or an essay, Google and perhaps law enforcement can check to prove that it was AI generated. It's possible that other labs are doing this as well. There are concerns around this, including complex legal issues. I wonder if we can smash through this in an hour or not. Let's have a look. As a really easy way of illustrating what watermarking is, let's use image watermarking because it makes more sense than trying to go straight into text. I don't like promoting this company, but here's a company that offers watermarking in their generations, in their Firefly generations. They also are part of content credentials, which checks images. I'm going to drag and drop one of my photos from one of my recent keynotes. This was actually taken by a photographer for Getty, which was kind of cool. Content credentials checks it, tries to verify it, says there's no content credential on this photo, which means we can possibly assume that it at least wasn't generated by Firefly. Their intention is to check that it wasn't AI generated at all. Let's try something similar using an AI text-to-image generator. We'll use Firefly here. Let's see if I can put myself in here. Alan delivering a keynote to government in a theatre. I think we can ask this to be a photo. Here we go. Yeah, good enough for me. What the hell? Was this guy standing on the seats? Oh no, he's standing on a box. They all look pretty terrible to me. Let's grab the standing on the seats one, just for fun. Let's grab this from here and we will attempt to have content credentials verify whether this was human or AI generated. All right, so it's verified that this was a generated image. The content credential was issued by Adobe via Firefly. That's kind of cool. I actually haven't tried this, but let's see what happens if we chop it up a little bit. I like playing with stuff in live streams, even if it breaks. Let's chop that visible watermark out because it's not checking that visible watermark. And let's cut out, or let's crop the top, bottom, left and right just slightly to see what we can do here. Excellent. Oh, come on. All right, I'll rename this cropped so that we know everything's on the up and up. Ooh, no content credential. So possibly not a great watermarking tool there, but that was fun to try. All right, so we do this across a lot of different modalities. Actually, Google pushes this through text, audio, video. It's the fact that it can do it across so many different things is really interesting. This is their Synth ID watermarking tool across text, music, and images and video, which is kind of cool. Let's actually spell out how this is working, and then we'll show how it works. So we're mainly interested today in the fact that we can watermark text, something that I had been saying was virtually impossible. We've seen OpenAI do it a couple of years ago, just after my UN report, but they only designed it in concept. They never put it in production, according to Professor Scott Aronson. This is how it works. When a large language model like GPT or like Gemini goes through its, let's call these probabilities for selecting each word, we can actually mess with those probabilities on the way out. So after the Gemini or GPT has thought about the most likely next word, we can tweak it, like a little pseudo-random algorithmic change, have a code word or some sort of key so that we know that it was generated by perhaps Google or by OpenAI. They might have a secret key. Eventually, companies might have their own keys. We're already seeing here with Google Synth ID, they're providing this functionality to all Hugging Face models. There are 150,000 Hugging Face models. They all have access to it, and you can generate your own key here. You'll see here the watermarked selection is slightly different to the statistically most likely next word or selection. And it's not choosing the highest probability each time. It's choosing, to get our watermark, it's choosing it based on a number which is mapped back to the key. Pretty simple, not flawless. In fact, in their demonstration output, the probability of being watermarked always sits at 99.9%. We can't be 100% sure. And this is a real demonstration or illustration of a piece of text, and it's showing you where the watermarks are based on the selection of words. Now, this is different to how some people thought we would do watermarking in text, which is use like Unicode special characters, try and insert 1.5 spaces or N dashes or M dashes or special characters through it, which would have been silly because you could just clear that by default with a script or something. Instead, this is changing the syntax of the output each time, and like we've mentioned, using a particular key to choose the next word so that we can then go and prove that that output came from that model. Got it? I know you've got it. Let's actually demonstrate it. Here is Gemini. Actually, we won't use this Gemini. If you wanted to use Gemini, there's gemini.google.com. We'll use Poe. And if it's okay with you, I wanted to play around with a real kind of, or at least a realistic use case from one of my old lives. This one, I'm asking Gemini to write the opening lines for the abstract of a new academic paper on room acoustics for vocal mics in large arenas. Mention specific frequencies, high pass frequencies, and mic selection for male versus female speaking voices. Be succinct. I only want a couple of lines here. So we'll try Gemini first. I've zoomed in so far I can't click the button. Here we go. I'm using this example because, well, number one, I can check it. Number two, we're going to show why watermarking is a concern at the moment. All right, thanks, Gemini. This entire piece, this entire response here is watermarked. Maybe a way to show you this is to put it into OpenAI's tokenizer, which isn't really going to help us that much. This is the GPT-4 tokenizer. GPT-4 was close to 2 trillion parameters. Gemini original was said to be also close to 2 trillion parameters, so hopefully they're using the same tokenizer. We're just showing here that the selection of each word, and hopefully the colors make it a little bit easier, is helping us prove that the entire abstract, or the entire opening lines of the abstract, are watermarked. And that'll be in the selection of It'll be in the selection of language. It'll be in the selection of punctuation sometimes. So for example, this little dash here, let's put this into a little place we can see. That's not the correct dash for separating numbers. We should be using an N dash, not that I'm an editor. Maybe that's a part of the watermark. Maybe some of the syntax here is part of the watermark. I think the main point is that we don't actually know, and only Google knows right now what the key is for the watermark, and only Google has access to prove that something has been AI generated by Gemini or not, for now. That might change. Imagine the FBI, the CIA comes knocking, or even the AFP from Australia, has said, we've received this note, we'd like to know whether it was AI generated, and then we would like to, if it was, we would like to go and find that user based on their IP. That's just one example of how law enforcement might go and use this particular technique or this mechanism to do stuff that up until a week ago we didn't know had been implemented in production. Google have been very direct with the fact that this is in production. They've said Synth ID text has been productionized in the user-facing Gemini and Gemini Advanced chatbots, the first deployment of a generative text watermark at scale, serving millions of users. They wrote that in a paper published in Nature just a week or so ago, and they say it's been tested across 20 million conversations. Pretty interesting. I think it's pretty interesting. Let's have a look at, we got this from Poe. Where's Poe gone? We got this from Poe for Gemini. Let's ask the same question to ChatGPT, and then we'll have a look at how we could actually clear this watermark. This is ChatGPT using GPT 4.0. Oh, we might also do Claude just for fun. We get a similar response, which I'm pretty happy with. Oops, where's Claude? This is still my day-to-day model. I think it's the most accurate, the cleanest. Oh, that's a lie. Who's analyzing 48 large values? Excellent. If we wanted to clear our watermark from Google Gemini, once again, this is watermarked, we could just put this into any other model. LifeArchitect.ai/models table lists about 500 models plus 100 Chinese models, and we could choose any of these to go and clean out our watermark. Well, obviously we couldn't use Gemini. I'd be avoiding the Google models. But even if we wanted to feed this to a nice version of Llama, and let's use the big version of Llama within Poe. This is Llama 3.1 405B from Together AI. They were recently featured in a paper that looked at, oh, we've got that paper right here actually. I recommend reading this paper. It's called Model Equality Testing. Which model is this API serving? It talked a little bit about watermarking, but it also looked at who was messing around with outputs. And for Llama 3.1 70B, Together AI was one of the few that wasn't messing with the outputs. Others were shortcutting, having a look at keywords, and then inserting new outputs, really playing around with sampling and the standard output that Meta AI intended. Interesting paper. Let's paste this into Llama 3.1 405B, ask editor, rewrite this slightly for, let's say, Stanford. It doesn't really matter. My prompt is not prescriptive. I just want to have this converted slightly. And you'll see the difference there. This paper examines, we've converted that to this study investigates, and now we've cleared the watermark entirely, but kept the meaning. So Google's millions, maybe in billions of investment in watermarking has been cleared with just feeding it to any of the 500 or so major models that are out there. And Google actually admit to that. So inside of my analysis of watermarking, they said there's a limitation of these generative watermarks, vulnerability to scrubbing, and in particular, generative watermarks are weakened by edits to the text, such as through LLM paraphrasing. I can't go and prove that that text was generated by a watermark. There's no synth ID user-facing verification. That's Google only at the moment. I would be betting that it's law enforcement as well. My concern right now is what happens when they give it to education institutions or companies. And I'm only talking about in this little interim of turmoil before we get to AGI. What happens when they give it to Brown University? And I've used Gemini, because it's got a 2 million token context window, to write my thesis for my master's, for my doctorate, even just for answering bachelor's level assignments. What happens if Brown retroactively goes and checks student work now that they can actually verify it with real watermarks for those that use Gemini, and also retroactively pulls my degree because of that check? That's just one of the many use cases that I've flagged that are of concern. And I think, and even though I asked for this, I think that because Google have implemented this quietly, they haven't put a warning at the bottom of their chat page like OpenAI has. They've got no warnings at all. If you go and compare that with ChatGPT, there's a lot of tabs. ChatGPT can make mistakes, check important info. This is not the case, but we could also, for Google, we could put something like this. Ooh, that's scary. Outputs are watermarked and can be verified by law enforcement. I think just because Google haven't been transparent with this and we don't know the outcomes, we don't know the legal issues, the privacy issues, the lack of consent here from users, I've, in my advisory note in the memo, I just said, don't use Gemini. For now, wait and see what's going to happen. I think this is a really concerning thing for Google to be doing under the table, and they've probably been doing it for a year. The paper was submitted to Nature, the journal, back in April 2024. I reckon this goes back to 2023 and it's not been revealed up until last week. Google made this available to all models inside Hugging Face. They now have about 150 models inside Hugging Face. How can we prove that one? I'm using ChatGPT search here. I don't know if I actually like it. Let's go back to Google. Hugging Face. I actually want models. Here's our text generation models in Hugging Face. As of the 4th of November 2024, we have 147,639 unique models. This bumps up by a few hundred every day, which is kind of cool. They all have access to Google's synth ID text, which allows people to set a key and to apply a watermark. There's a great example. If you'd like to play around with this yourself a little bit more, at the bottom of my watermarking analysis, LifeArchitect.ai/watermarking is a link through to the Hugging Face implementation, and you can play around with that yourself as applied to Gemma 2B. One of the other things I thought was interesting was that if you've written a book with Google Gemini, and you've published that book, I don't know if you remember this from this time last year, September 2023, Amazon was so concerned with AI-generated books that they restricted self-published books to 3 books per day. And I think there are examples of people who are using Gemini to write books at a pace of 3 per day that might be concerned if there's any fallout from this watermarking. All right. We smashed through that in 25 minutes. What did I miss? Watermarking on images, watermarking on audio, including all of Notebook LM audio files, watermarking on Imagine. These are not visible watermarks. They are invisible and potentially robust watermarks. Not like we just chopped up the Firefly image and it forgot who it was. It forgot that it had a watermark. But the way that Google and DeepMind implement this is a lot smarter than that company that starts with an A. So this is Google Imagine 3. This is what I use for all of my image generations these days. It's the best of the best. Some people compare the #1 spot with Flux. Flux is okay, but I think for text anyway, Imagine 3's one of the leaders for generating realistic images that have really good text in them. And just in the last maybe 24 or 48 hours, we have what looks like some new settings, including the ability to generate landscape images, something that could have been brought to my attention when I needed it last week. Cole asks, watermarking on music? Absolutely. I believe it exists, well, with Synth ID, it exists across the board in everything that they do. Let's go and have a look at AI-generated music inside Google's page here. They add a watermark into the waveforms here. You shouldn't be able to hear a difference. You will see a slight difference if you're staring at a spectrogram, but it should be something that is only provable by a digital watermarking tool. In this case for music, robust to noise additions, MP3 compression, speeding up and slowing down. You could compare this with YouTube's Content ID thing, which if you're chopping up a video to try and bypass or speeding it up or slowing it down, generally will still be able to prove that that was copyright owned. Harvey's here with us. Hey, Harvey. Harvey just appeared in TEDx somewhere in the backwaters of the US. He says copyright materials is a big deal, and Ted wanted to check that even images were allowed and not copyrighted, not just because it appears on YouTube, but because copyright is still a conversation that we're having in 2024. Let's wait until AGI is here. All right, I think I'm good to go to questions because we had a super fast version of going through watermarking. The conclusion that I had, if you missed it, was just avoid Gemini for now. I did use it recently for a really big transcript from Ray Kurzweil, who was back with an interview with my friend and yours. What's his name? Peter? Peter Diamandis. This is just from a few days ago, 10 days ago. It's worth either watching or reading, and I use Gemini just because it has that massive 2 million token context window, which is unimaginably huge. You also get access to that massive context window when you're using Notebook LM. And like I said, it's worth going through Ray and Peter's conversation because no one else in the world has been as accurate and as forward-looking as Ray Kurzweil. That's a very, 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 very long conversation. There we go. Even Bill Gates says nice things about Kurzweil. Don't know if we'll be able to find that. Let's see what ChatGPT search can do for us here. Oh, good work, ChatGPT Search. Bill Gates says, Ray Kurzweil is the best person I know at predicting the future of artificial intelligence. Have you guys been enjoying ChatGPT Search, or has it not been working for you? Do you prefer Perplexity, U.com? Do you just prefer Google? I think maybe given that I'm used to Google for the last quarter of a century, I did start using it in 1999. We switched from, what were we using? Excite? Was that a thing? Excite.com. Dogpile.com was big for a while there. Lycos, Alta Vista. 25 years of Google good times. I think, Cole prefers Perplexity. I think it's going to take a while, as Kurzweil says, actually, it's going to take a while for us to get our mental and emotional arms around the capabilities of AI, but also for us to just get used to a new way of doing things. The same with using smartphones. We're now, 15 years, maybe a little bit more, into smartphone adoption. At the top of every one of my keynotes, I ask who here does not have an Apple or an Android close by them. Everyone, I've never had anyone put their hand up and say, I don't have a smartphone. And that adoption was pretty quick, but consider that we're not going to be carrying around these weird pieces of glass and metal forever. We'll have our Retina things or our whatever is coming next. And I think the adoption of that and being able to be ready for that level of change is still a little bit jarring. Even this conversation of changing our search engines for people that have been using it for 25 years is a little bit unusual. Alta Vista. Oh, you weren't serious about this one, Cole? Oh, okay. We're talking about something else, I think. O2, absolutely. I have my own page on O2. It's been up for about a month or so, since O1 came out. This image was generated by Imagen 3, which means it was watermarked for me, although it would not be checkable by content credentials. It would only be checkable for now by Google and maybe by law enforcement. I've called this page O2, the breath of life. I'm looking forward to this coming out very soon. OpenAI's CEO recently had one of his little 4 minutes of trolling per month, he reckons he can get away with. That's a lot of trolling, actually. If we're just talking about typing it out, he could get through quite a lot. He says, I heard O2 gets 105% on GPQA, GPQA being that ridiculously difficult test that we've talked a lot about. Here are some of the models assessed on GPQA on the lower right of each of those blocks. And we've shown this before. When we move up this chart, we bypass humans completely. We jump over human PhDs. We jump over Einstein from an IQ perspective. But even what human PhDs can achieve on the GPQA test, they get 34%. Up the top here, O1 smashing out 78.3% on that GPQA assessment. Of course, it's impossible to get over 100% on a test, which is the joke. It's just the fact that OpenAI's CEO is mentioning O2. I reckon they are preparing for it as we speak, maybe even testing it, who knows. We still don't have the full version of O1 yet, so I'm looking forward to that first. There was a leak of O1 earlier in the week. You could have gone chatgpt.com /? model equals O1 and you would get access to O1 full, but that was pulled within an hour or two. Toasty Juice is not having fun with LLMs giving wrong results, even with the retrieval augmented generation that is Search GPT. I am constantly reminded that our LLMs are still imperfect. And if you are a member of the memo, we had a really fun challenge in the Toys to Play With section. I don't know if that's available for everyone to see. Let's go and have a look. There's a very long edition, the 4th of November. Oh yeah, people do have access to it. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, and this is from a Reddit discussion: get any AI to generate an image of a glass of wine that is full to the brim. Sounds pretty easy. Except that either with mode collapse or with the fact that these models have seen 5 billion images, but none of them of a glass of wine full to the brim, means that it has been very, very challenging for people to get this prompt to work. I would imagine that most frontier text-to-image models have seen a glass of beer full to the brim, and we could actually hack it to do that, but not a glass of wine full to the brim. So people were trying different little tweaks, tricks to get this done, and not quite getting the result. There's our glass of beer that's full to the brim. They had little hacks like this: a wine glass of red beer that is full to the brim. I don't know if that would be acceptable or not. There are a lot of questions and comments in the chat. If you are able to tag me, if you've got an important question, I will get to it. If not, I'll see what I can see. Yeah, David Shapiro, I think, decided to bow out of AI. I hope he's okay. He was one of our big voices in the space that wasn't necessarily theoretical, but was applying it to life. Cole asks, hey, Alan, on your AGI countdown, how do you select the percentage change per event, e.g. 5% for O1 release? That's a good question. Let me have a cough for a minute and we'll go to... Oh, I'll let you stare at the AGI countdown while I do that. We're at 83% on Alan's conservative countdown to AGI as of, well, it's the 4th of November, 2024. The last update was a week or two ago. We had a big leap from 81% to 83% when Anthropic showed their computer use model. There's a lot of YouTube discussions about that. In the memo, I list at least 4 examples of how people are playing around with Claude computer use. In answer to your question, I essentially use my head for how far we bump these up. You can think of it as a finger in the air. I'm trying to be as rigorous as possible, but there's no rubric, there's no we hit this percentage when we hit this particular capability. I think we're very, very close. My definition of AGI is a machine that performs at the level of an average or median human, including physical embodiment, which we also are a long way through. A median human might be someone that can, well, be truthful, that can taste, touch, smell, has an awareness of where their body parts are in space, and for 2 examples, can make a cup of coffee in a strange kitchen and can assemble basic IKEA furniture. I even list the kind of median human, statistically, that we want to match. A decade ago, it was a 28-year-old man from China, speaks Mandarin, doesn't have a car, doesn't have a bank account. Now it might be a 30-year-old woman from India working as a product manager. We know we can replace that immediately with O1, perhaps with computer control via Claude. Speaks 2 languages, that's pretty easy. Meta AI's No Language Left Behind could speak 200 languages 2 years ago as a large language model. She reads 700 books in her lifetime. These models are reading 35 million books during pre-training. I think we outperform human working memory pretty well. We outperform the SAT score. We outperform IQ in verbal linguistic testing. And there's a few other things that a median human can do. I think the long and the short answer to your question is I use feel on this one. I'm not trying to hit a particular score or rubric. I don't have an estimate for when we'll hit 80%, 100%. I'm not going to be aggressive with this, and I'm not going to be shy with calling it when I think we have 100% in lab. Doesn't have to be available to you and I. Doesn't have to be available to even a million, certainly not 100 million humans. It's when we have enough evidence to say that 1x or Google or OpenAI or XAI have capabilities in lab that outperform a human across the board. Excellent question though, Cole. And my 5% jump was for O1 full in terms of the numbers that they gave us. The numbers that they gave us were for the GPQA and the MMLU on the full model, I believe. And I'm looking forward to seeing that model. Drachmo, what a question. What would be an event that sets the counter back? Wow, never thought of that. Maybe when the nuclear hellfires rain down and clear everything, including our archives. That'd be pretty shocking. I might have spoken about this before. I do a lot of expert calls with some very, very big names, all of which, or none of which I'm allowed to mention because my NDAs say you're not allowed to identify who they are. But if you think of the trillion-dollar asset managers and companies, you'll recognize them. One of the questions I got at the end of an expert call recently was, what would happen if Google retroactively claimed against their transformer architecture and went after everyone and said, this is not open source, you can't use it. And I thought that was such a really fascinating question that in that moment I did not have an answer to. I still don't have an answer to. I think legally your lawyers would say that's absolutely impossible, but who knows? I have not considered an event that sets the counter back. In fact, I'm looking forward to this hitting 100% soon. I even have the first part of a letter ready for when we do hit 100% in lab. And if you've seen my other graphics, LifeArchitect.ai/gap, I think there's going to be a fair gap between us hitting AGI in lab and us having access to AGI. Even recently, OpenAI held GPT-4 in the lab for 8 months. They were recommended by their consultants and analysts to hold it for 14 months. That's more than a year. Thanks, Alan, for doing those numbers for us. Maybe they're doing the same thing with GPT-5 as we speak. They were releasing it to their cronies, to their investors, partners, friends, colleagues, friendly companies, but they did not give it to the public for a good 8 months or so. It's the same with Sora. There's more rumors this morning that they are going to be waiting until after the election. This thing was ready at the beginning of 2024. They've already waited about 10 months to provide access to Sora to anyone except these big companies, big film companies in particular. Again, their friends and cronies. Yeah, Cole, you're right. My entire timeline graphic is broken now. Even my bubbles chart needs updating because the recent news is that Amazon Olympus possibly had a failed training run. LifeArchitect.ai/timeline will show an example of why I don't do forecasts or predictions. We are not getting Microsoft's MAI 1500B apparently, potentially a failed training run. Claude 3.5 Opus might have been Claude 3.5 Sonnet New. Who knows? Aurora GPT went from 1 trillion parameters down to 7 billion parameters, and they still haven't even finished that. Olympus, potential failed training run. GPT-5, well, at least that one is probably ready, although we've heard rumors that they had a couple of failed training runs as well. Meta next. I'm confident that Llama 4 is going to be incredible. We have talk of it training on 100,000 H100 equivalent GPUs and 200,000 H100 equivalent GPUs coming up. Gemini 2, I'm confident that one's coming up. Grok 3, that one's coming up as well. They both, Google and xAI, have smart enough people to make sure that that one is ready for us. But other than that, that timeline, you're right, needs a big update. Claudio, back to our watermarking question. Do you reckon all API AI models will be employing watermarking in the near future? Yeah, that's right. At the end of that sentence, their regulators in particular and their conversations with the government mean that this will probably be happening. I just want them to be transparent about it, including transparent about the impacts of watermarking. And if you're having a look at LifeArchitect.ai/watermarking, one of the concerns that I put there, and this is not a full list of concerns, is everything from a searchable database that links individuals to AI-generated text that they produce, enabling surveillance, employers using watermark detection to terminate employees for unauthorized AI use. Worth noting that all of this discussion about watermarking is just for this little interim of turmoil right now, and obviously will not matter when we hit AGI in public fully, because we won't have concepts like employers then. Academic institutions we spoke about, insurance, government agencies, all of these and more, really concerning, and I think should have been part of Google being transparent with their users. So I won't say much more about that one. Don't really have an answer to Juice on this one. Do you think any gap speedups or delays still depend on human effectiveness? I do get asked in keynotes whether I'm scared of AI, and that is often a reflection of me asking the entire audience what percentage fear AI. And my answer is that I'm not scared of the technology, and I'm certainly not scared of smarts, but I am concerned about humans in the loop, the acceptance of humans in the loop slowing things down, humans going to war, having chip embargo, or having chip bans for different regions, all of the competitiveness and mental illness that we see across leadership. Ben's hoping for a few model drops after the US elections, which happen and are completed, I think, in the next 48 hours. Would that be right? Sebastian's asking, what happens after agents? That's a really good question. When would this happen? I have a pretty picture for that as well. LifeArchitect.ai/AGI. We've got a table that shows the comparison of AGI ASI levels from both DeepMind and OpenAI. OpenAI says agents come at level 3, where systems can take actions. Next up, innovators, AI that can aid in invention. I've been looking for this. We haven't seen this yet. LLMs have done a lot of things. We had AI models that were not LLMs give us solutions to COVID very quickly. Kurzweil talks about how different pharmaceutical companies used AI models to select and then prove that a particular treatment would be effective within 48 hours. Then human trials took another, I think it was 10 months. But innovators, AI that can actually invent things besides helping us do floor planning for circuits in GPUs or in CPUs, which has been happening for 3 years, 4 years. I haven't seen this and I've been looking for it. I will be documenting it at the memo. You're invited to jump in there, LifeArchitect.ai/memo. It's not to say that these things haven't done a lot of cool stuff. The models certainly have done a lot of cool stuff. You can have a look in as part of my models table, there are a few different tabs in here. One of them is GPT achievements, where it's, hit 100% in a new high school maths exam, passed engineering exams, been measured as funnier than humans, outperformed humans in stock selection, exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities by itself, outperforming all psychologists in social intelligence. That one's outrageous. These are, in many cases, peer-reviewed. But it's not actually doing anything new yet. Not discovering new things, not inventing new things. That will be next. I'm looking forward to it. And after that, we have AI acting as entire companies, doing the work of an organization. Level 5. OpenAI just says that is organization level. DeepMind calls that superhuman level. And perhaps in a moment of unguardedness, Dr. Demis Hassabis said, where's my zoom here? After AGI, suddenly the nature of money changes. I don't know if company constructs would even be the right thing to think about. I have heard different people saying things like this where perhaps they weren't saying this a few years ago. Bill Gates was another one. At the top of the most recent edition of the memo, we do quote him saying something. Oh, no, not at the top. Bill was concerned about hitting into probably ASI, needing a new religion or a new philosophy of staying connected to each other, because we will be essentially living in a virtual world that makes video games look like nothing in terms of the attractiveness of spending time on them. And he's also looking forward to solving disease, food, climate issues. What do we do next? Cole's asking about Blackwell chips. That's a really good question. These are pretty interesting. The B200s and then the entire big machine. Lost my words for a moment. Let's grab this for a second so we can see it properly. GPT-6, I think, might let us see this nicely. The DGX B200s, which are as loud as a helicopter. This is the first one delivered to OpenAI. It's 101 decibels when it's running in a room. Outperforms H100s by about 3x in inference anyway, or in training. I haven't got those graphs in front of me. I know at this stage we're still sitting with A100s and H100s for inference, but let's see what happens. I'm not totally across what we're going to be doing for inference. But keep in mind, it's not just the fact that we have 250 million monthly users of ChatGPT. We also saw 3 billion visits to chatgpt.com in September 2024. We need to start thinking about how we give access to billions of people across all sorts of regions, not just Silicon Valley, not just the first world. How do we actually find the hardware and the associated power to do that? And I think one of the ways is making smaller and more efficient models, Another of the ways is just getting our hardware right. And going back to our AI as inventors, it's going to be really interesting to see how it advances our hardware, how it advances our chips, how it advances our energy generation and our energy storage. And I think we can see some of that happening right now. Like I said, NVIDIA and Google for their TPUs have been using AI models for circuit design, for floor planning across the last 3 or 4 years since about 2021. What else are they doing? Recently, Google came out and said they're writing 25% of their code using AI only now. They don't even trust their software engineers because they're human. We're actually taking advantage of the fact that LLMs are smarter across the board. Here's some charts from 2 years ago with GPT-4. Remember, this was ready in the lab in around May 2022, where it was outperforming humans not just in things like the SAT, hitting 94% or in the 94th percentile, but also hitting the ceiling of tests like the theory of mind, a psychology test that allows you to put yourself in someone else's shoes, or the US Biolympiad. GPT-4 was smashing that, putting it in the 99.5th percent. Awesome. Any final questions before we wrap up? That was a fun one, a kind of unusual one, because normally I just talk about capabilities and scaling these LLMs to get them as big as possible. But I think it's really interesting to kind of look at the social dynamics and the social and legal and privacy issues of actually having a model, a popular model right now, that is embedding secret and invisible codes throughout the generative outputs. That is a concern because of the implications of what that opens up. Things like, I wrote my book with this. What does that mean? I wrote my essay with this, or my thesis with this. What does that mean? I wrote a ransom note with this, and it can now be proved that I wrote it with AI and potentially can be tracked back to my IP. I mean, there are important reasons for using watermarking, but should we be doing it surreptitiously? Interesting question. All right, Justin's saying this is what these labs are willing to show us. What do you think's next? I'm waiting for O2 that we just saw. I'm waiting for the big frontier models that we just listed, from Llama 4 to Gemini 2 to Claude 4. I'm waiting for LLMs that don't necessarily rely on pre-training. They have access to the world live and in real time. I don't think we have a name for that yet, but that is very human-like, where it can interact with the world. Right now, all our LLMs are frozen black boxes, and they're frozen in time at the last date of the last piece of data that they saw during pre-training. So even, I think our most recent model with the most recent cutoff date is Claude 3.5 Sonnet New. Yes, it's a ridiculous name. Has a cutoff of April 2024, not quite 6 months ago, something like that. So it's half a year out of date when you're asking it questions, which makes it a little bit useless for use cases that are for right now. So maybe Ilya's working on something like this. Maybe the top 5 labs are working on something like this. It's a little bit of a different paradigm than we've been seeing with our standard GPT models. Dominic asks, is the watermark location traceable to the user? Apologies if I didn't make this clear. The watermark is in Synth ID, it's just a different way of doing things. It's not a location. For the images, the entire image was selected pixel by pixel to map to a particular key. So we haven't overlaid a watermark. It is a watermark. Same with audio. You can't think of it as overlaying a watermark that can then go and be removed. It's robust enough because it's built into that audio. And the same with the text. You will have seen that just the example they gave, it's embedded right the way through it in the selection of words, in the selection of punctuation, and then in the syntax. So in the position of those words throughout that paragraph. Google says that this is effective from just 3 sentences. And if you've got a whole, 20,000 word essay, it's going to be pretty robust to any sort of change, unless you feed it to another LLM and spit it out again. They absolutely should have called Claude 3.5 Sonnet new Claude 3.6. I wonder what their reasoning was for it. Maybe they just didn't want to rename it themselves in the API and then potentially have thousands of companies have to mess around with renaming as well. Cool. That was a blast. Thanks for spending an hour with me, rocking and rolling here. We're going to do this all the way through November and December. If you'd really, really like to pull this back 2 hours, throw a thumbs up in that chat so I can see it. And if you don't want me to pull it back 2 hours, maybe throw a thumbs down. I don't know how to do that, but I bet you do. And we will consider changing this time around. So we've got the 3rd of November in the US today, but we'll be back in a week from now to talk about potentially O1 and advanced use cases of O1. I've been playing around with a lot of big Fortune 500s recently with very specific use cases of a reasoning model that's really good at thinking through, sometimes for minutes, to come up with an answer. Sometimes it's for business case, sometimes it's for a project, sometimes it's for a really big question to be able to find an answer to that question. And we don't have a prescriptive way of prompting it. We don't even have a use case for when we should use O1 versus GPT-4o. And even OpenAI have not been that helpful for playing around with what you should use when, which model you should use when. Eventually they'll tack them together and the model will decide which one you should use at which point. But we're going to have a play with O1, or that's the plan, this time next week. Unless something cooler happens, and I feel like talking about that. We'll aim for 2 hours behind this start time next week. Looking forward to seeing you there. I am looking forward to seeing you there, and hopefully there'll be something huge to talk about. Maybe it's not Search GPT, because that was not that interesting, but maybe it is one of the new frontier models. Maybe it's a new release from Anthropic. There's a few rumors that are hanging around right now. And I, as always, look forward to waking up every morning. Still feels like Christmas because there's so many cool things happening. One thing I do want to show at the right time is, I think it's Udio's, might be Suno's mechanism, where you can give it a picture and it will generate a song from that picture. How cool is that? I want to show that here, and we'll do that in keynotes next year. Thanks again for joining us. You're invited to join into the memo. We're 10,000 plus subscribers. Apple uses it for their Apple Intelligence paper recently. Joe Rogan's talked about it. We've got everyone. Rand has been really heavy in there recently. I can see BCG are using it quite a bit. If you are in the memo as a full subscriber, you get access to my kind of cool paper on GPT-5. No one else has done this yet. I don't know why. It might just be because I'm interested in data sets, but I've got a paper called What's in GPT-5, 27 pages long. It spells out what we know so far from some of the public-facing info on how they're training, or how they trained GPT-5, what data sets they used. There's a little bit here in the preview that shows how they actually use synthetic data. And we've had a live stream about it before, but this spells out in plain English how they're actually using GPT-generated textbooks rather than the original textbooks to get around this absurd conversation about copyright, something that I hope doesn't exist post-AGI. Wouldn't it have been cool if 8 billion people said, yes, just go and use everything I've ever said and done, have access to, well, not everything, have access to everything that I've published on the web that is clean enough, sanitize it, and then this model trained on 8 billion people, potentially 110 plus billion people who've been living since the dawn of time, all of them conscious, would that make our next frontier model even more conscious, having access to all of that data? As it is, we live in a weird world of patents and copyright and people guarding their data like it's some sort of gold pile. I'm looking forward to the next step. I hope you like the gap in the intro. Oh, sorry, the who will pay them back. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Jump into the memo, LifeArchitect.ai/memo. See you soon.
Did you see the memo about this?
Yeah, I have the memo right here.
Superintelligence is unfolding at lightning pace. Read my industry-grade analysis of AI that matters as it happens in plain English, the memo.
Yeah. Did you get that memo?
Yeah, I got the memo.
Get the inside look as AI models are embodied into humanoids, AI's IQ increases to nearly perfect, and bleeding-edge use cases expand to the entire world.
Yeah. Didn't you get that memo?
Editions are sent to subscribers at Fortune 500s, major governments, and people like you. LifeArchitect.ai/memo.
I have the memo.